The digital chime from my phone was a sound as mundane as any other that Tuesday morning, yet the message it heralded would shatter the carefully constructed facade of my family, a facade I had spent a lifetime and a small fortune propping up. It wasn't a dramatic pronouncement, no raised voices or slammed doors. It was a sterile line of text in the Family First group chat, a name that now tasted like ash. "Leo," it began, from my mother, Evelyn. "After much consideration, and for the sake of absolute harmony, we all feel it would be best if you didn't attend the wedding celebrations. We're aiming for a completely drama-free environment." A second later, a tiny, pulsing heart appeared beneath it. My brother Julian, the groom, had loved the message. That icon, a symbol of affection in every other context, was the period on the sentence of my belonging. In that silent digital endorsement, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt the entire architecture of my role within the family groan and splinter, a foundational crack spreading through decades of silent compliance. My name is Leonardo, though I've always been just Leo. To understand the weight of that message, you must understand my position in the ecosystem of my family. I was not the glittering centerpiece, not the cherished favorite. I was the infrastructure. The load-bearing wall, the electrical wiring hidden behind drywall, the plumbing that functioned silently and without praise. I was the one you only noticed when I failed to perform. My mother, Evelyn, is a curator of appearances. Our family was her most prized exhibition, a collection of achievements and aesthetics to be displayed under perfectly calibrated lighting. Emotions were like dust on the glass cases, to be quietly, firmly wiped away. My father, Arthur, was less a presence and more a pleasant vapor, a man who had mastered the art of benevolent absence, drifting into his study whenever the winds of conflict began to stir. And then there was Julian. Julian was the sun, brilliant, magnetic, capable of both warming and scorching. His very existence seemed to bend the gravity in any room toward him. His successes were festivals. His stumbles were tragic misunderstandings. He was forgiven before he even thought to apologize. I, in stark contrast, was the earth. Dependable, solid, and perpetually underfoot. My achievements were met with a polite, "That's very sensible, Leo," as if being sensible was a consolation prize for not being spectacular. So, when Julian proposed to his fiancée Sophia, a woman whose smile was as bright and vacant as a camera flash, the delegation of duties was not a discussion. It was an assumption as natural as sunrise. I was handed the wedding. Not metaphorically. I mean, a physical binder, already labeled Julian and Sophia, master plan, was placed in my hands by my mother. "You're so good at this sort of thing, Leo," she said, her tone leaving no room for the concept that I might have a sort of thing I actually enjoyed. "We all trust you implicitly to make it perfect." The "we all" was a fiction, but the trust was real. They trusted me to execute, to bankroll, to worry, and to remain unobtrusively in the background while Julian and Sophia basked in the spotlight my efforts would generate. And I accepted. Of course I did. It was my script. I am, by profession, a project manager for large-scale construction firms. My world is made of Gantt charts, risk assessments, and concrete deliverables. Chaos is the enemy, and I am its sworn nemesis. In a twisted way, planning this wedding was just another project. The venue search was a site acquisition. Caterers were subcontractors. The seating chart was a complex logistical puzzle. I immersed myself in spreadsheets and vendor contracts, my personal account becoming the de facto wedding treasury. I told myself this was an act of love, the ultimate support for my only brother. But a quiet voice, one I had spent years learning to ignore, began to whisper that love shouldn't feel like a relentless series of withdrawals from an account that no one else ever contributed to. The only person who ever seemed to hear that same whisper was my grandfather, Walter. He lived in the old craftsman house where my father grew up, a place that smelled of lemon oil, old paper, and wisdom. His sanctuary was a book-lined study, a fortress of quiet sanity. I would visit him weekly, often under the guise of updating him on the wedding plans. But really, I was coming to recharge in his calm presence. He'd watch me pore over floor plans, his keen blue eyes missing nothing. One afternoon, as I stressed over linen choices, he set down his book. "Leo," he said, his voice like stones gently rubbing together, "you remind me of a mighty oak in the middle of a park. Everyone admires the shade, the children climb your branches, couples carve their initials into your trunk. But does anyone ever ask if the oak needs water, or if its roots are getting crowded?" He gave me a long, sad look. "A tree that only gives will one day find itself hollow." I shrugged it off with a weak smile. "It's just what I do, Grandpa. I don't mind." But I did mind. I just didn't know how to stop. The cracks in the project and in my resolve began as hairline fractures. During a tasting, my mother would gush over Sophia's selection of a canapé, calling it inspired. When I suggested a more substantial option for the older guests, she patted my hand. That's very pragmatic, dear, but let's not clutter the vision. My father's contribution was a recurring mantra. Julian is so lucky to have you handling all this. It's really taking the stress off him. Not a word of thanks to me, only praise for the benefit conferred upon Julian. Then came the budget meetings. The initial number, which I had calculated with meticulous care, was treated as a quaint suggestion. Julian and Sophia would return from a venue, or a designer with eyes full of stars and ideas that doubled line items. Can't we just make it work, Leo? Julian would ask, his tone one of breezy expectation. You're the wizard with the numbers. Just shift things around. The shift always meant my personal funds absorbing the overage. The most chilling moment came when I presented a revised schedule showing that the dream lighting package would require cutting the live band to a DJ. Julian didn't even look up from his phone. He simply sighed, a sound of profound inconvenience. Leo, come on, can't you just absorb it? You're good at that. You're good at that. Not, can you help, but a statement of my function. My role was to absorb impact, cost, inconvenience, emotion. The morning of the text, I was in my home office, a space that had become wedding central. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing over piles of fabric swatches and a stack of contracts needing final signatures. I was authorizing the final, massive deposit for the florist, a breathtaking but exorbitant design of white orchids and cascading ivy that Sophia had fallen in love with. As I clicked the confirmation button, a beam of light caught the old brass pocket watch on my desk, a gift from Grandpa Walter on my 21st birthday. It was perpetually stopped at 11:11, he'd told me. That's a moment for making wishes, Leo, but also for clarity. It's a mirror hour. When you see it, you see the truth reflected back. I'd always thought it was a sweet superstition. Then my phone chimed with the familiar, torturous melody of the family chat. I read my mother's message. Then I saw Julian's heart. The truth, reflected back in the cold light of my screen, was unbearable in its clarity. I was not a guest of honor. I was a vendor, a problematic one now being politely unhired. They weren't just asking me to miss a party. They were airbrushing me out of the official family portrait. A profound, almost supernatural calm descended upon me. The panic, the anxiety, the desperate need to please. It all evaporated. It was the calm of a mathematician who has finally solved for X and found the answer to be 0. My hands were steady as I typed my reply. Understood. I will respect your decision completely. I paused, my fingers hovering. Then I added the second sentence, the one that would detonate their carefully constructed world. Accordingly, you will also be free from any further financial obligations associated with the event, effective immediately. I hit send. The silence that followed was deafening, total. Then I got to work. This was not a project of emotion, but of decommissioning. I opened every digital folder, every email thread. I reviewed each contract I had signed, every vendor whose services were secured with my credit. One by one, with the same clinical precision I used to manage a construction site shutdown, I drafted and sent the emails. Per our agreement clause 4B, I am exercising my right to cancel all services. No further invoices are to be issued or paid. All pending charges are to be refunded to the original form of payment. I cited dates, agreement numbers, and my authorization signature. I offered no explanation, no family drama. This was a business decision. The fallout was both instantaneous and strangely quiet. My phone began to buzz, first with confused texts from the wedding planner, then with increasingly panicked calls from my mother, which I let go to voicemail. I listened to one. Her voice was sharp, bewildered. Leo, what on earth is this? The florist just called me. This isn't funny. Call me back immediately. I deleted it. That evening, as a heavy twilight settled over the city, there was a soft but firm knock at my door. It was Grandpa Walter. He stepped inside, took one look at my face and the serene chaos of my desk, and nodded slowly. They did it, didn't they? He said, not needing specifics. They finally showed you the price tag they'd put on you. He walked to my window, looking out at the glittering skyline. I tried to tell your father years ago that treating people like utilities always leads to a blackout. He didn't listen. He turned to me, his eyes fierce. You believing them, Leo, that's the first step. Now what's the second? I've already taken it, I said, my voice firm. I've canceled everything tied to my name. A slow, proud smile spread across his face. Good. Then the third step is letting them see the consequences, not in anger, but in the clear, bright light of day. The confrontation, when it came, was not at a family dinner or a furious phone call. It was in the stark, public fluorescence of the International Arrivals Terminal. They were returning from a wedding inspiration trip to Tuscany, a last-minute jaunt I had, of course, been expected to fund. I stood with Grandpa Walter and a composed, sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Alana Reed, an attorney who specialized in elder law and financial protection. She held a simple leather folio. We saw them before they saw us. My mother, Evelyn, looking polished and vaguely triumphant. Julian, tanned and scrolling through his phone. My father, Arthur, trailing behind with the luggage cart. My mother's eyes scanned the crowd for their hired driver, then locked onto me. Confusion, then severe irritation twisted her features. She marched over, Julian in her wake. Leo! What is this? I told you we had a car service. This is not the time for one of your awkward attempts at reconciliation. I'm not here to reconcile, Mother, I said, my voice even. I'm here to ensure there's clarity. Ms. Reed stepped forward, a study in professional poise. Evelyn and Arthur Vanguard. My name is Alana Reed. I represent your father, Walter, and your son, Leonardo, in matters pertaining to the attempted financial exploitation and the planned misappropriation of Walter's protected retirement and healthcare fund. The color drained from my mother's face so completely it was alarming. Julian's phone lowered. Excuse me, my mother hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. How dare you? This is a private family matter. Which became a legal matter the moment you and Julian pressured Mr. Walter Vanguard to liquidate his secure annuity to cover wedding overages, specifically the Venetian glass centerpieces and the additional champagne tower, after Leonardo withdrew his funding. Ms. Reed stated coolly. She opened her folio, presenting printed copies of text messages. My mother's own words, cajoling my grandfather, were there in black and white. Next were the bank transfer requests, and finally the ledger of every wedding payment I had made. Julian found his voice, a sneer marring his handsome face. This is insane! He wanted to pay for it. He volunteered. He always does everything. That's the crux of the issue, Julian, I said, finally speaking the truth I'd swallowed for years. You never saw it as a gift. You saw it as my function, my purpose. You didn't value my help. You depended on my silence, and you assumed Grandpa's money was just an extension of mine, a family resource for you to consume. The public nature of the scene was my mother's kryptonite. She flinched as passing travelers slowed, curious. My father, for the first time I could remember, stepped into the center of a storm. He looked at the documents, then at my grandfather's stony expression, and finally at me. Leo, son, he stammered, genuine shame coloring his cheeks. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. We never meant... You never thought, Grandpa Walter finished, his voice cutting through the terminal's hum. You never thought about the cost to Leo. You never thought about the safety of my last years. You thought the foundation would never invoice you for its labor. He took my arm. We're done here. Ms. Reed handed my mother a formal envelope. Cease and desist regarding any contact with Walter Vanguard's financial institutions. Next steps are outlined. Any further attempts will result in a restraining order and criminal charges for attempted fraud against an elder. We turned and walked away. The silence behind us was palpable, a void where their entitled world had once been. I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet reclamation. The legal boundaries held firm. My grandfather's finances were locked down under a fiduciary arrangement with me as the executor. The wedding of Julian and Sophia, absent its funding and its project manager, collapsed like a poorly pitched tent. Relationships with certain extended family members became strained, as my mother's version of events painted me as a vengeful monster. But the peace I found was worth the exile. I began using my project management skills not to build stages for other people's performances, but to create safety for those who couldn't fight for it. I volunteered extensively with a nonprofit legal aid clinic that protected seniors from financial predation. Grandpa Walter would often accompany me, his presence a quiet beacon of dignity. We were no longer the supporting cast in someone else's drama. We were the authors of our own, much quieter, much richer story. Looking back now, from a place of hard-won peace, I understand that loyalty is not a blank check. It is a mutual covenant. Real love does not demand your erasure. It requires your presence, your whole self, not just your utility. That text message, that digital whisper of exclusion, was not my ending. It was my long overdue beginning. It was the moment I stopped being the family's foundation and started building a home of my own choosing, one with boundaries as strong as any wall, and a peace more valuable than any diamond ring. My story isn't about destroying a wedding, it is about constructing a life built on the unshakable ground of self-respect.